This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Make this summer count with Harvard Summer School. With Harvard's free college programs, high school students gain confidence and insight into what college is all about, challenge themselves, and discover new friends. There are over 200 courses to choose from, including college credit courses, so it's the ideal way for students to learn something new, but most importantly, have fun. Visit info.summer.harvard.edu/Spotify to learn more.
Burlington's Oh Wow Winter Clearance event is on right now. Throughout your store, you'll find tons of new markdowns just taken. Look for red clearance tags throughout the entire store for her, him, the kids, and your home. Score some serious savings at Burlington, up to 70% off other retailers' prices on clearance items. These deals on top of deals won't last long, so stop in today. Burlington. Deals, brands, wow. Prices and selections vary by location.
Hey, this is Ed Toth, drummer for the Doobie Brothers, and you're listening to my weekly mixtape with Brian Colburn. So, turn it up.
Welcome to My Weekly Mixtape, a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. This past summer, you might recall the Album Dive episode of the show that spotlighted Vertical Horizon's Everything You Want 25th Anniversary Edition, featuring a sit-down with the band's Matt Scannell. Tonight, I'm absolutely honored to have Ed Toth on the show, who not only was the drummer for Vertical Horizon during that era of the band, but in the 20 years since he's left Vertical Horizon, has been behind the kit for the legendary rock band, as well as Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees, the Doobie Brothers. Ed, thank you so much for joining me on My Weekly Mixtape. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
No, it's my pleasure to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Well, as a first-time guest, I'd like to start by asking you, what does the word mixtape mean to you?
Oh, man. So I made a lot of mixtapes when I was in high school. And just for reference for anybody that might be listening, I was in high school from 83 to 87, which was probably the penultimate time or the ultimate time to be making mixtapes, because that was kind of a thing. And not only did I certainly make the mixtape for the girl, here's some songs you might like, but I would just make them for fun. In fact, I would call them, various artists. And I think by the time I was done with high school, I had like 22 volumes of various artists' cassettes and a slew of friends that would insist that I make a copy for them. So I was kind of a DJ without being a DJ. Like, I always thought that being a DJ would be fun, although for a lot of reasons, I just never went there at all. I was never a DJ when I was in college and never had any real sort of aspirations to be a DJ. And by DJ, I mean like a radio disc jockey, not somebody spinning tunes at a wedding or something. So I never went that route, but that was kind of my own way, I think, of being able to do that. And the fact that I garnered a small but fun following of friends who wanted to hear what I came up with next was pretty cool.
Mixtaping, you're doing it right.
That's right.
Before we dive into the Doobie Brothers music, I'd like to start by talking a little bit about your time with Vertical Horizon as the band's massive album, Everything You Want, celebrated its 25th anniversary in 2024. Could you talk about the significance of that album with a quarter century of hindsight?
Yeah, I mean, I'm amazed it's been 25 years. In some ways, it does feel that. It feels like a lifetime ago, but in other ways, it kind of just feels like it was yesterday. Because, we kind of got to ride the wave of that for a long time. And the simple fact of the matter is that I still hear those songs. I still get asked about those records. Since it's come out on vinyl, I've had a couple of people pop up here and there looking for a signature on the record, which is pretty cool. I haven't signed a Vertical Horizon record in a long time. So having that happen over the past year or two has been really fun as well. that was a really important record. Certainly for me, it was my first time making a major label record. It wasn't my first time in a recording studio, but it was my first time recording with the kind of budget that a major label allowed. And, we didn't know if we would get another crack at it. So we sort of put everything we possibly could into that record, including sort of finishing it, not being totally happy with it, going back and revisiting some of the tracks after the fact, and all of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into not only the making of the record, but then once it came out, the promotion of it. And we were fortunate enough to be sort of at the tail end of what they call the sort of golden era of record making, where a record label, they wouldn't just put out your record and you had a month to make it or break it. I mean, these people put a lot of time into working the record at radio, and because they really believed in it. The people that were working at the record label at the time, this would be RCA Records, and this would be circa 1998 till about 2002, when things started to really change, not only at the record label, but in the music industry. I mean, that record was released in the fall of 1999 and didn't really hit until the summer of 2000. You don't get that anymore from a record label. You're either hot out of the gate or they're done with you. So it was nice to experience that with all the people that were involved in that as well, which were real old school record label people, which was at a time when record label people were actually music fans.
Now, I had talked with Matt about this, but you mentioned it just now. October 19th, 1999, that's when Everything You Want was released to alternative radio, but it didn't reach number one on the Billboard US Hot 100 until July 15th, 2000. That's 9 months for the song to make that full ascension to number one. And like you said, that just doesn't happen anymore, where a label gets behind a band for that extended period of time. Can you maybe talk about that 9-month stretch where the song was taking off and the band made that jump from, as Matt put it, slogging it out in bars to becoming a band with a number one Billboard hit under their belts?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing too, that era of bands of just, I mean, when I joined this band, it was campgrounds, it was people's floors in a sleeping bag. And when I left the band, we could at least stay in a Marriott and have our own room, which was something at the time, It very much was a process. And, you talked about, well, you alluded to sort of different radio formats. I mean, when the album first came out, the record label released the single We Are to alternative rock radio, which is where they thought they might be able to get a foothold. And it did okay there, but it didn't make a ton of noise. And then when they decided they were going to put Everything You Want out, they decided, let's release this across sort of all formats. Adult contemporary, pop, like the whole thing. And that's when it really started to take off. It also helped that, I mean, we visited 2, 3, sometimes 4 radio stations a day.
Wow.
To shake hands, kiss babies, as it were, play acoustic, talk about the album, cut liners for the radio station, the whole thing. And this would be after a night of doing a gig that didn't wrap until midnight, and then having to do an 8-hour drive or so to the next city. There was a lot of sort of, what do they call it, GI showers, just sort of dumping a bottle of water on your head in the parking lot of the radio station out of the van and making yourself look decent to go in and do an interview for the morning show. So there was a lot of work and effort put into that. And we took what we did very seriously. I remember as the song was getting added to radio stations, I remember taking a few days, 1 week, where we hand wrote letters to program directors, thanking them for adding the song.
Wow.
And I think that kind of thing went a long way with the radio stations, to the point that when we released the next single, Year of God, it was almost a no-brainer for any station that played Everything You Want to play Year of God, because we were team players and, we were nice guys. We were ourselves. We didn't put on any kind of front as a rock and roll band or anything like that. We were just 4 guys that anybody would have known in their lives who just happened to be in a band that was making music that resonated with people.
Your neighborhood just got cooler with Kroger Delivery's refrigerated trucks. Simply order groceries at the same great prices online as in-store, and we'll bring them to you fresh every time. And if that wasn't cool enough, you can now earn 4 times the fuel points after 4 with your digital coupon. Choose a next-day Kroger Delivery time slot for 4 p.m. or later on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Must deliver by February 4th. Restrictions apply. See Kroger.com for details.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Komm du noch?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
And one of the other hits from the album, Best I Ever Had, Gray Sky Morning, went on to become a top 10 country hit for Gary Allan. What were your thoughts when you first heard your band's song reimagined as a country tune?
You know, it's funny because I think that either was happening or started to happen as I was exiting the band. So I didn't hear it for the longest time, and then I heard it. Or maybe it was right before. I can't quite remember the timeline. It was so long ago. But I do remember hearing it and the sort of story behind it with Gary Allan, who had lost his wife. And it was sort of a dedication to her.
Yes, that's right.
And I just thought that, as I said earlier, good music resonates with people, regardless of how it's presented or how, what format it's in or genre, as it were. And, the simple fact of the matter is that, don't tell him I told you this, but Matt Scannell's a really great songwriter and writes really great songs. And I remember that song sort of came in late in the game of the recording of the record. It was one of the last songs he wrote for it and one of the last songs we recorded for it. And I remember at the time not quite being so sure about it. Not so much that it was a ballad, but I just didn't know until I heard the finished product. And then I thought, oh, okay, we really did something nice with this tune. It's got a really nice atmospheric beginning. And, it went through a couple of different changes, as songs do, as they're sort of being birthed. But once I heard the finished product, I thought, oh, okay, this is something here. Looking back, I didn't love that it was sort of the last single from the record. Although I guess technically maybe it wasn't. I can't remember if we released Set It Up as a single or not. But I know we had talked about it, but I don't think it actually happened. Because by then, it was difficult because even when You're a God was released as a single, Everything You Want was still at the top of the charts. So we were sort of competing with ourselves, which was a little bit of a difficult position to be in. It's one of those like tough problem to have kind of things, So I think by the time Best I Ever Had came out, Everything You Want was just everywhere. And then You're a God had a bunch of traction. The video was being played on VH1. It was part of a Jim Carrey movie called Bruce Almighty.
Yes.
As well. And so I don't know that the timing for Best I Ever Had was exactly right. But you know what, man? At the end of the day, I played on an album that had like 3 hit singles on it. You can't argue with that.
Not at all.
You certainly can't complain about it.
No. Some people are looking for just that one hit single their entire life. But after the massive commercial success of Everything You Want, the band finished up the follow-up record, Go, in 2002. But that album was delayed for over a year because of the restructuring of RCA Records at the time, and finally saw release in September of 2003. I think the album had some fantastic singles on it. Forever, I'm Still Here, When You Cry. Can you talk about the experience of trying to follow up a massive hit record and maybe the challenges that those delays presented the band?
Yeah, it's funny because I think we all have a little bit different perspectives on this. I feel like the fact that Go didn't quite do what Everything You Want did obviously was incredibly disappointing. But at the same time, making that record for me was an incredibly joyous time. You know, we were in Southern California. The first record had been a success. I was just it was all music all the time for me out in Los Angeles while we were living out there making the record. You know, if I wasn't working on it during the day or in the evening, I was out going to listen to friends play in clubs. I was spending a probably obscene amount of money at Amoeba Music on CDs and just listening to all kinds of different stuff because it was such a rich and fertile time in music still. It was still sort of that carryover from the 90s where everything that was on the radio was just so varied and so wonderful, and you still didn't quite have the rigid format structure on radio that eventually it became. You still had stations that would play Mary J. Blige and Vertical Horizon. So, yeah, looking back, it was just a wonderful time, and a lot of the music on that record came together extremely quickly, very organically. I remember, I think we recorded 15 or 16 tracks for what became, I think, an 11-track record. And I mean, Sean and I had the bass and drums done in like 4 days. You know, we pretty much did pre-production ourselves. I think the band as a whole should have gotten a production credit on that record because we did do a lot of pre-production work, arrangement of the songs. A lot of that stuff was done by us prior to entering the studio. And having the time to do that was wonderful as well. But, you know, at the same time, the experience might have been different for other people. I know Keith's contributions were less than they had been previously. I can't speak for Keith, but I think there was maybe some pressure to kind of come up with hits. And that's not the kind of songwriter Keith Kane is. And Matt came up with some gems right out of the gate. When You Cry, Forever, Goodbye Again, which was kind of a holdover from Everything You Want, although it changed up a bit from when we were initially working on it. But we turned that record, and, you know, Matt was going through a divorce at that time, so I'm sure his experience of making that record was very different from mine. So once we kind of wrapped it all and turned it in, we were excited about it. But at that point, I know the president of the label had been let go, a wonderful man named Bob Jameson. And Clive Davis had been hired to replace him. And Clive's not a rock and roll guy, he's a pop guy. And then one by one, all the people that were on the team that made Everything You Want such a success, and by the team, I mean the team at RCA Records, basically all lost their jobs.
Wow.
So by the time that record came out, even if it had come out in 2002, I think we might have stood a better chance if it came out when we wanted it to come out, which was September of 2002. And the record label gave us the line about not hearing a first single, which I thought was total BS, because When You Cry alone would have been a killer leadoff single for that record. Could have followed it up with Forever, you know, some of the other tracks that are on there. But we don't hear a leadoff single. So we want you to go back and write a song that we could use as a leadoff single. So we went back and Matt came up with I'm Still Here, which was a cool enough song. I don't love the way we presented it on record. There's some sonic elements in there that were sort of purposefully reminded you of Everything You Want. And I just thought that was like a cheap way to go. But, you know, again, it was a team effort. And we listened to the people that had experience getting behind hit records. And so we thought, okay. And it wasn't bad enough that it was like, okay, let's not do this. I do remember suggesting at the time, and I mean, it must have lasted all of 5 minutes because I think my idea didn't go over very well. But I remember suggesting that I think I called it, Let's Pull a Wilco. Do you remember Wilco's story about Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, where they finished the record and there was turmoil at their label, so they decided not to turn the record in?
Yes.
And I thought, why don't we just not turn the record in? You know, maybe if Clive Davis isn't interested in our band, maybe at some point they'll let us go and we can take this record, which we strongly believe in and think is a really good record, to a different label that will get behind it and hopefully repeat the success of Everything You Want. Well, the idea was kind of shot down. So we kind of went with what we were given. So by the time we recorded I'm Still Here, again, the timeline's a little bit fuzzy, but I can be almost certain that it was done by spring of '03. And then still the record didn't come out until September. And you could tell from the get-go that RCA was not going to get behind this record the way they'd gotten behind Everything You Want. In the video process alone, basically VH1 was saying, where's the video for I'm Still Here? We want to play your video, you know? And RCA was saying, well, let's see what kind of traction it gets at radio. And then if we get some traction at radio, we'll commit to a video. And they were just not putting in the effort at radio whatsoever. We did, but we weren't visiting as many stations as we had during Everything You Want. And I'm sure Matt's told the story about when Go came out. I remember we were in Chicago and we went out to buy it because I can't speak for Sean and Keith, but I know Matt and I had a habit of going out to the store to buy our record the day it came out. Because we just thought that was kind of a cool thing, you know? And I still have both Go and Everything You Want in their shrink wrap from bought the day that I bought them. And we could not find Go anywhere. I think I had to go to 3 different places before I actually found a copy of Go. And we were expecting like it would be on an end cap somewhere or some kind of display. Like, here's 100 copies of the new Vertical Horizon record. When I found it, I found the one that was in the Rock of V bin.
Oh, wow.
There was also a little glitch on the cover of the Go album. If you look at the cover, right in between our logo and where it says Go, there's a little white, it almost looks like a comma. That was a glitch. That was something in printing. And it either didn't get noticed and was put out like that, or got noticed, and the powers that be said, yeah, we're not recalling all of these things.
Wow.
I remember Matt saying at the time that never would have happened with the Christina Aguilera record. She was on the same label as we were. And he's absolutely right. So all these little things, like you just knew, the way we could feel that Everything You Want was going to do something, we could feel that Go was not going to do much of anything. And this was all before we went out to start promoting it. And that was heartbreaking. And it made it very difficult to be out on the road promoting a record that you knew wasn't going to get any traction. And not only that, but being out on the road promoting a record that at that point for us was a year and a half old from the time that we had conceptualized it and started to work on it to the time that it hit the streets. So as frustrating as that was, when people talk about Vertical Horizon, I always ask them, have you heard the Go record? It's different for me. My perspective on it from where I'm sitting is always going to be different because I was in it. But I stand behind everything we've done. And I know and I'm very proud of what the Everything You Want record means to people because I've heard people's stories about it. And at the end of the day, I think Go is a better record. And I've talked to some people that didn't even know we did a record after Everything You Want.
Wow. I was going to say Forever is a song that holds a very special place in my heart. I mean, I absolutely love the tune. In 2005, you made a very difficult decision to part ways with Vertical Horizon. Can you talk about what led you to that?
You know, it was sort of a perfect storm of things. The process with Go had been sort of heartbreaking. That was the fall of 2003 into 2004. In 2003, I'd had my first child. So that was part of the decision making. A lot of it came down to the fact that Vertical Horizon, we were looking at a 2005 of not really having much work on the books. And I didn't want to spend a year not working. As I said, I had had a child at that point. We'd done okay on the road and things like that. So I wasn't hurting, but I wasn't, some rich rock star. That's just not the way it works. A lot of the major revenue that came from Everything You Want came in publishing and songwriting, which is where most of the revenue is in songwriting anyway. It's in publishing. And that's not an income stream that we shared at all. So I wasn't sitting at home getting paid if we weren't working. So I needed to do something. And the opportunity came up to audition for the Doobie Brothers, and who have always been one of my favorite bands since I was a kid. Now, initially, I sort of thought that, okay, well, we're not doing anything in 2005. If I get this Doobie Brothers gig, I'll go on the road with the Doobie Brothers. And then, you know, at the end of 2005 or whatever, Vertical will gather and start planning what we're doing for 2006, hopefully making another record and all that. There were some other things going on too. We had gotten dropped from the label. Our management company believed in Go and wanted to reissue the record. That was a weird thing for me. I was not behind that initially. And then I sort of came around as a team player and said, okay, if this is what everybody wants, this is what we're going to do, then let's do it. And in hindsight, I wish I had sort of stuck to my guns and tried to convince the guys of what not a good idea that was. I felt like if anything else, we could have taken a couple of the songs we truly believed in from Go, licensed them from RCA, if we even wanted to do that. At this point, going indie financially would have been a great move. We didn't really know that at the time. I mean, if the record industry landscape began to look like that would be a good way to go. So I was sort of like, well, let's pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and put this in the rearview mirror and just go make another record. We've got a fan base now. Maybe we can make a record that we'll just pay for ourselves. And hopefully it's a good enough record that maybe some label will want to get behind it. And if we go to them with a record that is made and paid for, you know, we can get them to sink some money into it to get some of our initial investment back and then just continue on. I know Matt was very disillusioned about the, I guess, disappointment, as it were, of Go. And at a point where he didn't really know what he wanted to do next, not only as a band member, but as an individual. So I went and auditioned for the Doobies. And at some point, it sort of became apparent that there may not be a Vertical Horizon anymore. It looked like that maybe we were done, through various conversations with various people in the camp. And I began to realize what a commitment the Doobie Brothers was going to be. It wasn't going to be just like go on the road for a few months and then go back to your regular gig type kind of thing. So I kind of had to make the decision to step away. And it was incredibly difficult because I still think that those four guys, me, Matt, Keith, and Sean, had more to say as a unit. And for me, you know, I didn't get to do that because I made the choice to step away. And it was tough, but it was what I had to do at the time. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't have any regrets about it. I'm incredibly grateful for the 9 years that I had in Vertical Horizon. I mean, who gets to say that they got to do that? And yeah, there's gold records and platinum records and all that, but one of the coolest things I have, which of course is in a closet somewhere because I'm not the guy that has that stuff hanging up around the house, you know. But our management company gave us this really great plaque that has the Hot 100 chart from the week that Everything You Want was #1.
Oh, that's awesome.
Seeing our peers at the time, Dave Matthews Band, Hootie and the Blowfish, Matchbox 20, you know, below us. Seeing our heroes, Sting, below us on the chart was just like, wow, like for 1 week in 2000, like our song was king, you know? And eventually I think somebody said it was one of the most played songs on American radio in the year 2000. And I still hear it. I mean, now it's usually at the grocery store or like Home Depot or something, you know? I don't hear it on the radio that much anymore, but it's wonderful. And I still get a little performance royalty every month. Thank you, Bruce Almighty, for playing on that, because it's in a movie and that royalty stream is a different thing. So I've got nothing but pride and joy when I talk about Vertical Horizon. Although at the time in 2005, like any sort of divorce, it was a bit difficult. I have to say, last year, I saw Vertical Horizon for the first time since I'd left. I saw them in Boston, and really, I hadn't stayed away. It was just a case of scheduling, or we never crossed paths. although I'd been in touch with the guys all this time, there was a little bit of space of communication between Matt and I think that was just a sort of, like I said, the sort of divorce type kind of thing. It was never negative. It was just sort of, I was doing my thing, he was doing his thing. But I'm happy to say now that it's not like that, has not been like that for years. So when I saw that, I happened to be in Boston for an event for the Zildjian Cymbal Company, and I had the night off. And sometimes when I'm somewhere with a night off, if I feel like going to see music, I'll hop on Polestar and see what's going on. And it's Vertical Horizon City Winery. And I said, you got to be kidding me. You know, I'm like, this is it. This is the moment, you know? So I texted Matt and I was like, hey, I think I said something like, hey, is my credit good for a me+1 for the City Winery show tonight? And he texted me back something like, absolute fucking lootly, you know? And don't know if you beat things out or not, but there you go. And so I went down and it was wonderful. I saw a bunch of people I hadn't seen in a long time because Boston's sort of a local gig for Matt. So his mom was there. His dad was there. His brother was there. I mean, these are people I hadn't seen in 18 years. And it was just a really nice sort of homecoming, as it were. I didn't play. I said, man, I'm just going to watch you guys do your thing and enjoy it. And, you know, I'll come back and chat with you afterwards and all that. So it was cool. It was really, really cool. And Matt gave me a really sweet shout out from the stage, which he didn't have to do. I felt like Buddy Rich, like at a Rat Pack concert or something, you know, because he pointed me out in the audience and he asked people to applaud. And I was the guy standing up and sort of waving, right? Like kind of parade wave to the audience. Oh, thank you very much. You know? And honestly, it was a really, really sweet moment and something he didn't have to do at all. And I thought the band sounded phenomenal. You know, I know the guys in the band casually from like social media and things like that. And I'm involved in an event that the guitar player John Wesley does a lot, a fundraiser event it's a Neil Peart themed thing, cancer fundraiser called Bubba Bash. So we crossed paths there as well. So it was just a really special thing. Sorry, I kind of rambled on with that. But
not at all. It's a wonderful story. And we're promoting this episode as the ultimate Doobie Brothers playlist. And we've talked about Vertical Horizon, but you can't get your story in the Doobie Brothers without the Vertical Horizon aspect of it. So Correct. Here you are in the same year, 2005. You're recruited to replace Doobie Brothers drummer Keith Knudsen after his sad passing from pneumonia. During your early tenure with the band, you were playing alongside Michael Hossack, who, again, we sadly lost in 2012, and then Tony Pia, as the Doobie Brothers incorporated that dual drummer approach for a very long time. Then when Tony left the group, you became the sole drummer of the band. Can you talk about that transition from a dual drumming role to being the guy behind the kit?
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people ask me about it as if it was there were some big adjustments to be made or anything. And the honest answer to that is that there wasn't. The two drummer thing in the Doobie Brothers was a little bit different than the two drummer thing in, say, the Allman Brothers or Genesis or King Crimson, in that for the most part, we're pretty much just playing the same groove. And then we would switch off fills here and there. You know, you take this fill, I'll take this fill, just so we're not stepping on each other. So that's kind of what the two drummer approach was in the Doobie Brothers. So the only adjustment really that needed to be made when I became the sole drummer was just to make sure I didn't sit out on a fill where I normally used to. So there would just be dead air, you know, and it wasn't like that at all. And in fact, if I'm being totally honest, with all due respect to the history of the two drummer thing in the Doobie Brothers, it was very freeing to just do the gig as the sole drummer. Because, you know, different drummers have different feels. Some guys play a little on top, some guys play right on, some guys play a little behind. Some guys vary what they're doing depending on the style of tune, the section of a tune, that kind of thing. So I think I played well together both with Mike and with Tony. It was a little bit of the weight off the shoulders to be doing it by myself. And then in 2018, we added percussionist Mark Quillones, who was actually in the Allman Brothers. And that opened up a whole new world, because if you go back and listen to those Doobie Brothers records, there's really, with the exception of one album, there's really only a couple of tracks on each record where you can hear two drummers playing. That's because, in fact, on a lot of those tracks, there's just one drummer playing. But there's percussion on almost every single Doobie Brothers track. So when the discussion came back around to maybe trying to fatten up the rhythm section again, I was sort of very vocal with the guys about, like, you don't want to go back to two drummers. What you want to do is you want to hire a percussionist, and like a legit percussionist. You don't want to hire a drum set player who's looking for a gig or somebody to shake a tambourine or whatever. You want to get somebody that plays percussion for a living. And I know just the guy. And it was Mark. And at the time, Mark was still in Greg Allman's solo band, but Greg hadn't toured for a while because he had been dealing with health issues. And when we first asked Mark to join us, I believe it was in 2017, and he declined. He said, I would love to. I'm honored that you asked me, but I'm still loyal to Greg. And even though we're not doing anything right now, I wouldn't feel right jumping to you guys right now. So we sort of said, okay. The tour had been booked at that point. So I think thinking from the guys was like, okay, well, Ed did most of 2016. Let's just keep it as is and go out in 2017. So we did that. And then 2018 came around and sort of Mark called us because it had become apparent that Greg was ill and, it was sort of terminal. So he called us and said, hey, if the offer still stands, I'm interested. And so we had a corporate event set up in Florida, which oddly enough is where Mark lives. So we went to rehearse for this event because it was after we'd been off for a couple of months. So we went rehearse. We asked Mark to come down, and it was like 2 days of rehearsal, I think. So they said, well, why don't you come down, check out this rehearsal, play with us at rehearsal, do this corporate event with us, and then we'll take it from there. And he's been there ever since.
So over this time, the band goes through these transitions, two drummers to a single drummer to a drummer and a percussionist. While in the band's world, it seems like a natural progression to the audience, having been used to seeing two drummers on stage and that becoming almost synonymous with the band. Was there ever any point where the audience gave you feedback that maybe made you think or made the band think, or was it always whatever you guys do, we're on board with?
Well, I can't speak for what the band may have thought because I'm very much a sideman and I'm privy to certain conversations and not others. I would hear from fans now and then. I've seen fans post things on social media. It's never negative at all. But you hit the nail on the head, and I've said this a million times before in different interviews and whatnot, and I'm going to say it again. But you hit the nail on the head. It's always, I miss seeing two drummers. Nobody has ever said to me, I miss hearing two drummers. So yes, I feel like the visual aspect was definitely part of the Doobies' DNA and all that. And on some of the songs, for sure. I mean, if you dig deep and put some headphones on and listen to songs like 8th Avenue Shuffle, Without You, Road Angel, there's some great two-drummer stuff going on. But if you put your headphones on and listen to China Grove, Long Train Run, and listen to the music, Taking It to the Streets, What a Fool Believes, there's one drummer playing.
Well, we're working kind of chronologically through your career here. And in 2017, yourself, fellow Doobie Brothers member John Cowan, and Keith Howland of Chicago released an album as the band Button. Can you maybe talk about how this funky, jammy, and I'm going to use the word proggy project came together, and maybe shed some light on the music the three of you made?
I love that you use prog. Prog is not a dirty word to me.
Awesome.
In fact, the three of us are fans of progressive rock. And we thought to ourselves, when we saw the logo that my brother's involved in graphic design. In fact, he did a Vertical Horizon record after I left. But he came up with the Button logo that's on the front of that album. And when we saw the logo, we thought it was really cool. And we thought to ourselves, what if we came up with a sort of proggy kind of cover for the album? And for those that don't know, which is probably everybody listening to this, the cover is of a man in a suit walking a cat on a leash through a sort of garden type area. And I can't think of much that's more proggy than that. I mean, even the cover for Vertical Horizons Go, the original cover of the kid outside the swing set, which is an image my brother found as well, we thought it was super. We're like, oh my God, this could be a Pink Floyd record, you know?
Yeah.
And we loved how it reflected the idea of go do your thing, like sort of stand outside the bubble, as it were. So Button came about in a way, in sort of a very, very organic way. Keith Howland used to be the guitar player in the band Chicago. And John Cowan plays bass and sings in the Doobies with me. And John has had his own project for years that I've played with him on and off, which is rooted in bluegrass, but it's kind of all over the map. So we decided it would be fun to put together a little covers thing and do some sort of off-the-wall cover tunes that not a lot of people do. We were doing things like I'm Not in Love by 10cc, She's Gone by Hall & Oates, and What Is and What Should Never Be by Zeppelin, instead of the usual Zeppelin covers that you hear, and playing different things like that. And we did a couple of gigs like that. And then one day we got together, and John was just singing on the covers thing. We had a different bass player, a guy by the name of John Billings. And one day we got together to play, and John couldn't make it. John Billings couldn't make it. So Cowan just played bass. And we futzed around with a couple of older, like Peter Green era Fleetwood Mac tunes. And I think we might have played Run to You by Bryan Adams, just having some fun. And we sort of got off into just kind of jamming, as you do.
Yeah.
And we probably jammed nonstop for, I would say, close to 3 hours. Just having fun, old school, in Keith's basement, banging around, playing music, seeing where it took you and all that. A day or two later, after the jam, I get an MP3 from Keith. And it simply said, I think there's some tunes here. And then it had a list of like time markers, like where to go on the MP3 to listen. And he was right. There was some cool sort of riff ideas and song ideas. So the next time we got together, instead of jamming out on cover tunes, we revisited some of these ideas. And within the span of, I don't know, maybe a month or two, getting together, Keith was all set up for recording and all that stuff. And before we knew it, we had put tunes together. Some of the stuff on that record is directly from the jam. Most of it is ideas that came up in the jam that we re-recorded. Put a couple of ideas together, like this idea at 4 minutes and 33 seconds will go well with this idea at 2 hours and 15 minutes. You know, it was such a long MP3 because we'd start jamming and Keith would just hit record and it would just go on forever. So that's generally how that came together. And then once the tunes were sort of assembled, we, mostly Keith and John, but on a couple of the tunes, the three of us would throw out melodies and lyrics. Not always in the same order. Usually melodies would just be scat singing, and maybe you'd come up with a line here and there. It was an incredibly organic and fun way to make a record. Probably the most fun I've ever had making a record. Because at the time, we didn't even think it was going to be a record. We were just putting some songs together because it was fun. And then we thought, at the end of it, listening to some of the playbacks, it was just kind of like, we're idiots if we don't make this available to people. But then, of course, by the time it was done and we put it out, we used a crowdfunding thing to put it out. And we had sort of delusions of grandeur, like we'll put a little club tour together and blah, blah, blah. And by the time we got it out and got it together to start making those plans, both Chicago and Doobie Brothers plans got in the way of it. So it kind of came out released to a void. But for people that want to look for it, it's called Button. Apparently, I think there's a couple of bands called Button. It's the one with the guy in the suit walking the cat on the leash on the cover. And it's on all the platforms. And we actually, the three of us recently talked about putting it to vinyl.
Nice. Now,
hopefully that will see the light sometime in 2025. So.
And for those listening, I'll be sure to embed that album on the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com so you can give it a listen. So, Ed, we've talked about your role in the band, but we haven't touched on the songs. And you said it earlier, you've been a fan of this band your whole life. So as a fan of the band who turned into a member of the band, I'm kind of really excited to hear your perspective on some of these things. First off, what songs do you consider to be essential to a Doobie Brothers live show? Meaning the fans would be upset if they weren't in the set list. And I have a reason for this question, but I want to hear your answer first.
Sure. I mean, I feel like a lot of it's obvious. Listen to the music, China Grove, Long Trade Run, and Blackwater. With Michael, of course, now Michael's been back since 2021, and he is back. I mean, that's a thing. So What a Fool Believes, Taking It to the Streets. I think Minute by Minute. A lot of fans with Michael there, they want to hear Minute by Minute. Rocking Down the Highway. I mean, that's a lot of, okay, we kind of have to play these songs. I mean, that's over half a dozen songs right there.
Right.
I think a lot of the other ones, some of the album tracks, you could move those in and out because they're not ones that the casual fan's I think the casual fan's going to know Best of the Doobies, basically. And we play every song from that record, from Best of the Doobies. I think as we should. I mean, it's one of the best-selling albums of all time. I think it's still in the top 10 or top 20 best-selling albums of all time, Best of the Doobies. So we play all the songs from that. And I think the album tracks for the diehard fans, I'm always making noise about having multiple set lists and moving album tracks in and out. But at the same time, I kind of stay in my lane. Like it's their band and all that. And I try to avoid being seen as like the fanboy, even though they know, like, I mean, I wrote a letter to Doobie Brothers fan club when I was 10 years old. That's a true story. Yeah. And they know this. And so, we tease each other about it sometimes. So I feel like, when I really feel like I need to chime in on something from the creative side of things, whether it's the design of a set list or something like that, I will. And when I feel like, okay, that's not a hill I want to die on, I'll stay away. I'll stay away from it,
So I guess my logical follow-up to that is, with 15 studio albums of material to choose from and 36 singles over the band's 5 decades, how does the band formulate a set list that honors those hits? Like you said, the entire Best of the Doobies album, digs into some of the deeper cuts to satisfy the diehards, and maybe include new material like songs from the band's latest recording, 2021's Liberty.
So I feel like these guys love to play. And, I think it shows when you see the show. And I don't know if it's in there your list of questions, but it comes up a lot. Like, how does it get boring playing the same songs over and over again? And the answer is no, because the audience is different. No audience is going to sit through China Grove, but every audience is going to have a different reaction to it. And it's going to be positive. So just being able to see the faces and watch the people react to that makes it easier to play China Grove for the 10,000th time or whatever, even longer for those guys. As far as constructing the set list goes, I know that there are a handful of tunes that they just really like to play. Now I'm talking about songs that are not the hits.
Right.
If the Doobie Brothers decided to not play Blackwater one night, I mean, they would be crucified. You know what I mean? So it's going to be in the set list. But when it comes to some of the more album track kind of things, I feel like a lot of times they lean on songs that they like to play, songs that they know fans will like, with the occasional sort of surprise tune. And like you said, be able to save a couple of spots for some newer material. Because I think a lot of bands of their ilk, I'm talking about the legacy sort of classic rock bands, they know they're not going to sell records the way they used to. They know that the diehards will pick it up and then that's going to be that. They know that the new stuff's not going to be on the radio. But that doesn't mean that they don't want to play it, and at least let people know, like, hey, this is out there. Plus, it's something totally, completely new and fresh for them, and for me, for us, the sort of side guys, So yeah, I think they're very careful about that kind of thing, and I think every tour I've ever been on with them, which has been 20 years now, the stuff has changed in the middle of the year. I'm sick of that. Let's replace it with this. Or I really would like to add this. Or a song that they used to like to play a lot maybe got put on the shelf for a little while. And then 6 or 7 years later, they dusted it off and brought it back, So that happens a lot too.
Well, now, Ed, I'm going to ask you to take off your drummer hat for a second and put your fan of the band hat on for this next question. Do you have any bucket list songs that you'd love to play with the band at some point, or have you checked off all of those boxes over the last 2 decades?
I absolutely have not checked off all of those boxes. Yeah. We did a cool thing a few years back where we played the Toulouse Street album and the Captain and Me album in their entirety.
Yes,
at the Beacon Theater. Yeah, we filmed it. It's a DVD and all, and we recorded it for a live album. And those shows are the most fun I've ever had in this band because we were doing something incredibly unique and we were digging deep. And those records are so good. So to be able to play like the title track from The Captain and Me was just absolutely wonderful. And to be able to play songs like White Sun and Snake Man and Bomb Toulouse Street, even the Toulouse Street title track, which doesn't even have any drums on it. So fun. I mean, in my opinion, the best song Pat Simmons has ever written. So much fun to have that material be played to an audience. And I know the audience absolutely loved it. So I would love to do some things like that again. I would love to play absolutely anything that we've never played from the What Were Once Vices Are Now Habits record, which just happens to be my favorite Doobie Brother record.
Nice.
Top to bottom, I just think it's their best record, hands down. These things are subjective, of course. You could go round and round with different people and, different albums mean different people for different reasons, whatever they were going through at the time that the album became important to them, all that kind of stuff. But from a purely musical standpoint, there's so much cool stuff going on that record. And then there are some really sleeper songs in that, songs that I don't think, if they've ever played live, they certainly haven't played since the 70s. Songs like Texas Lullaby from Stampede, 8th Avenue Shuffle from Taking It to the Streets. One of Michael McDonald's best songs that he wrote during his time with the Doobie Brothers is on the Minute by Minute record. It's a song called How Do Those Fools Survive? Great song, cool lyric, which is it's sort of like the idea of a God looking at humanity and sort of throwing his hands up in the air and saying, what are you doing? Just a really, really cool and musically just chilling. For those people not in the know of Doobie Brothers stuff, one of your favorite guitar solos that you've never heard of all time is during the out chorus of How Do the Fools Survive by Skunk Baxter. Great guitar solo. And then even some stuff in the 80s. There's a song on the Cycles record called Time Is Here and Gone, which I would love to play. And I think would be such a great song to play for a band that's been around for 50 plus years now. And there have been cool songs on the recent records, which we've never gotten around to, simply because how much new stuff can you subject an audience to when you're a classic rock band? And which makes sense. You kind of have a thing that you need to go do when you're a band that's been around for 50 years. So there's a good handful of tunes. I mean, I could write a set list of songs that we've never played in the 20 years that I've been in this band, and it would be a full show.
Can I add one to it? I would love to hear
Sure.
The Doctor from the Cycles album. To me, that was one where I remember buying the cassette single, getting in the car with my father and playing it, and he just pauses for a second, and he goes, wait a minute, you like the Doobie Brothers? And I said, yeah, this song's awesome. He goes, oh, do I have a surprise for you? And we went home, and he broke out the vinyl, and to me, that was like a bonding moment with my father because they were still producing hits in the 80s, but for some reason, that song obviously just it kind of fell through the cracks of 5 decades of hits.
Yeah, I mean, it was big at the time. I remember it sort of brought them back, as it were, because they had not been around at that point. Cycles was what, 87?
I want to say it was 89.
89, okay. So yeah, so they had broken up in what, 83. And 4 years later, they did some reunion shows for National Veterans Foundation. And these shows included like everybody that had been a member of the Doobie Brothers, except for one guy. And they had so much fun doing that their producer from the 70s, Ted Templeman, said, why don't you put the original band back together? Michael McDonald was deep into his solo career at that point. He said, why don't you put the original band together? Let's make a record, which eventually Teddy wasn't involved in because of scheduling and whatnot. But that's how that came together with that record in 89. And I remember that song being on the radio and just being in 1989, being like, holy crap, the Doobie Brothers have a hit on the radio. This is kind of cool, know?
Yeah.
And then I think they put another record out in 91. And of course, by then grunge wiped all of those bands off the map in the industry, the changes in the industry as well. But yeah, there's a ton of material there. I have played The Doctor. The Doctor's been in the set over the last 20 years. I think it's one of those songs that should be in there fairly regularly. But again, not my decision to make. So it's really tough with the Doobie Brothers. If you were to take Best of Volume 1, Best of Volume 2, or most of Best of Volume 2, and then the later, like The Doctor and stuff, I mean, that's a whole show right there.
Yeah.
That's without any album tracks, without fan favorites, without any kind of surprises. When we've done corporate events for an hour or 75 minutes, you're just like, holy crap, every song we just played was a hit. So, to be able to give that variety, again, I think that lends itself to the idea of the rotating set list. But again, maybe we'll get to that. Maybe we won't. Who knows?
Well, earlier I had talked about Gary Allan covering Vertical Horizon's Best I Ever Had. But in 2014, the Doobie Brothers released Southbound, which was a collection of songs from throughout the band's catalog, reinterpreted for country, and featuring guests and duet partners like the Zac Brown Band, Blake Shelton, the late Toby Keith, Brad Paisley, and Sarah Evans. And when you hear these songs blended with that touch of country, there's that classic rock familiarity to them. But there's also you know what? These songs work as country songs. Could you talk about the band's thoughts on that album, and if these collaborations maybe widened the band's already huge fan base, at least from a country perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a strong affinity to that record for a couple of different reasons. One, I'm not on it. I haven't played on any of the studio records that have come out since I've been in the band, which doesn't bother me. I understand that sometimes that doesn't happen with sidemen. It's usually a producer's call, and it's the band's decision to either go with what the producer says or not. And they've chosen to go that route, which is no harm, no foul. The Southbound record, I can honestly say I've not even listened to it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for no reason other than it wasn't something that I was involved in at the time. I think we did a Crossroads episode with Luke Bryan to help promote that record. And we may have done a couple of TV spots where we just played a couple of the hits sort of as they are. However, it makes total sense because one of the great things about the Doobie Brothers is they are all over the musical map. If you go back to those older records, you could point to songs that would easily have fit into country radio of the 70s, which, mind you, was very different from what country music is now.
Yes.
But a song like South City Midnight Lady, a song like the aforementioned Texas Lullaby from Stampede, any of these songs could have been played on country radio in the 70s. And not because they have pedal steel on them or violin, but because they sound like country songs of that era. Although you don't have somebody singing with any kind of twang, they're acoustic-based, country-flavored songs. And when you get, the initial thing with the Doobie Brothers, it was very much Tom Johnston and Pat Simmons kind of baby. They were the two singers. They were the two main writers. And Tom comes from a R&B blues background. And Pat comes from a finger-picking, almost folk acoustic kind of background. And then you sprinkle in the intersection of the things that they love. Like they both loved a Bay Area band called Moby Grape. And they both loved singing. There was a lot of vocal group approach to some of the Moby Grape stuff and a lot of the bands in San Francisco back at that time. And just the stuff that they heard growing up, the Everleys, the Byrds, bands like this. So sprinkle that with some rock and roll and a little bit of psychedelic San Francisco stuff, and you get the Doobie Brothers in 1972, 1973, as unique as they come. And then, 4 years later, you add a blue-eyed soul singer to that mix, and you've got a sort of band that could play any genre. And some of the instrumental passages, there are prog moments on Doobie Brother records. There are fusion moments on Doobie Brother records. Like, no doubt about it. There's hard rock moments on Doobie Brother records. You listen to a song like Without You or Evil Woman. The riff in Evil Woman gives Tony Iommi a run for his money. You know? For those that don't know, Tony Iommi is a guitar player in Black Sabbath. So, to be able to be in a band that, and also, let me rewind a little bit. To be able to be a young musician growing up playing along to those records. I was playing along to all these different genres without even knowing that I was playing all these different genres. Huge, huge educational component to my growing up as a musician, my growing as a musician.
And do you think that education helped flavor what you did in your time with Vertical Horizon?
Yeah, I think so to a degree. I think the live album I made with Vertical Horizon is very much a combination of everything I'd learned as a musician up until that point, everything I had listened to, all of that. Because I didn't have a producer standing there saying, no, straighten out that fill or do that. Everything you want, less so, because first major label record, first big time recording studio, working with a producer type kind of thing, not wanting to get in the way of things. I sort of dumbed down my playing a little bit on that record to just kind of stay out of the way of the tunes, with mixed results, in my opinion. Go is all me, just rocking out, and the feel on that record and the confidence on that record, so much more so than Everything You Want. From all of us too, particularly in the rhythm section with me and Sean, because you got to remember with Everything You Want, Sean had just joined the band and hadn't done a lot of the road work that we had done together up till that point. There was a bass player before him. So to circle back to your question, yes, from where I sit right now, I do believe that across all the recordings I've made, you can't help but be informed by all of those things that you picked up along the way.
Well, in 2019, you had mentioned this earlier, Michael McDonald rejoined the Doobie Brothers for the start of the 50th anniversary tour, which was paused and subsequently resumed in 2021 due to the pandemic. Is there a dynamics change when he's a part of the fold versus when you were touring without him, either from a musical standpoint, a set list standpoint, or just from the way the band presents the songs to the audience?
Well, sure. Naturally, you're going to have something different with that. It's the idea of how different was Van Halen with Sammy Hagar than with David Lee Roth.
Right.
And you could have said that about the Doobie Brothers back at that time, but now you've got them both. You've got Tom Johnson, you've got Michael McDonald, and then, of course, you've got Pat Simmons, who's been there through the whole thing. So you've got all the singers. Imagine if we did get to the point where we were able to get that Van Halen tour with both David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar. It would have been something else, right? So for Doobie fans, I think it's great that they have that. For the Doobies, it's great. There's never been any animosity between the members at all. So they all get along great. And I think it's just, if you can add a strength to what is already strong, and that strength happens to be Michael McDonald, it's like the Atlanta Braves pitching staff in 95. It doesn't get any better than that, So it's a great dynamic. Yeah, it does change it. No for better or no for worse, just incredibly different. And the simple fact of the matter is when you have all those components, more people want to come out and hear it. Although you always have the people that are, all the only true Doobie Brothers is with Tom Johnston, or the people that only like the Doobies with Michael. And, you can't please everybody. And the bottom line is that at the end of the day, those people are in the minority anyway.
So what are the Doobie Brothers' plans for 2025 and beyond?
Well, I know I'm going to be on the road in 2025. They have a new record that they've been working on. And they have a tentative title, but I don't know if that's actually going to be the title. So I'll sit on that. But we played a song from it during the last few shows of 2024, and it seemed to go over pretty well. And it's one of those things that I always wish that they would do, which they've done in this particular song, which is called Walk This Road. They each sing a verse.
Oh, nice.
Mike sings a verse, Tommy sings a verse, Pat sings the bridge. It's just a great bluesy shuffle, kind of almost gospel shuffle kind of thing. And it's a really good tune, and I'm glad we were playing it. And, I can't wait for people to hear it and experience it. So, yeah, there'll be a new Doobie Brothers record in 2025. Not quite sure when yet. My best guess is probably summer. And we'll be out there doing some stuff.
Well, Ed, this has been an absolute honor talking music with you tonight. Look forward to catching you when the band hits the road in 2025. And most importantly, thank you so much for joining me on My Weekly Mixtape. My pleasure, man. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun. And for those listening, head over to the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com to hear a playlist filled with some of the best songs from throughout the Doobie Brothers' incredible catalog of music. And remember, you can also find My Weekly Mixtape on almost all the social media haunts at My Weekly Mixtape. You can also head to myweeklymixtape.com to check out the full catalog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. There you can find ad-free episodes of the show, gain early access to upcoming episodes, chime in on future topics, become a guest curator, and so much more. That's all for this week. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, enjoy the tunes.